The Iranian regime has committed multiple violations of the agreement. For example, on 2 separate occasions, they have exceeded the limit of 130 metric tons of heavy water. Until recently, the Iranian regime has also failed to meet our expectations in its operation of advanced centrifuges. The Iranian regime has also intimidated international inspectors into not using the full inspection authorities that the agreement calls for. Iranian officials and military leaders have repeatedly claimed they will not allow inspectors onto military sites, even though the international community suspects some of those sites were part of Iran's clandestine nuclear weapons program. There are also many people who believe that Iran is dealing with North Korea. I am going to instruct our intelligence agencies to do a thorough analysis and report back their findings beyond what they have already reviewed. By its own terms, the Iran deal was supposed to contribute to regional and international peace and security. And yet, while the United States adheres to our commitment under the deal, the Iranian regime continues to fuel conflict, terror, and turmoil throughout the Middle East and beyond. Importantly, Iran is not living up to the spirit of the deal. Finally, on the grave matter of Iran's nuclear program, since the signing of the nuclear agreement, the regime's dangerous aggression has only escalated. At the same time, it has received massive sanctions relief while continuing to develop its missiles program. Iran has also entered into lucrative business contracts with other parties to the agreement. When the agreement was finalized in 2015, Congress passed the Iran Nuclear Agreement Review Act to ensure that Congress's voice would be heard on the deal. Among other conditions, this law requires the president or his designee to certify that the suspension of sanctions under the deal is appropriate and proportionate to measure and other measures taken by Iran to terminate its illicit nuclear program. Based on the factual record I have put forward, I am announcing today that we cannot and will not make this certification. We will not continue down a path whose predictable conclusion is more violence, more terror, and the very real threat of Iran's nuclear breakout. That is why I am directing my administration to work closely with Congress and our allies to address the deal's many serious flaws so that the Iranian regime can never threaten the world with nuclear weapons. Importantly, Iran is not living up to the spirit of the deal. So today, in recognition of the increasing menace posed by Iran, and after extensive consultations with our allies, I am announcing a new strategy to address the full range of Iran's destructive actions.
The deal, which took the Obama administration 18 months to negotiate, stopped Iran's nuclear programs in exchange for some international sanctions that were in place for over a decade to be lifted, allowing billions of dollars of Iranian funds to be unfrozen, which Trump claims is being used to fund terrorism.
The regime remains the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism and provides assistance to al-Qaeda, the Taliban, Hezbollah, Hamas, and other terrorist networks. It develops, deploys, and proliferates missiles that threaten American troops and our allies.
Trump also authorized the Treasury Department to, quote, further sanction the entire Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps for its support for terrorism and to apply sanctions to its officials, agents, and affiliates, and says the new strategy will also seek to address the proliferation of Iran's missiles and weapons.
We will work with our allies to counter the regime's destabilizing activity and support for terrorist proxies in the region. Second, we will place additional sanctions on the regime to block their financing of terror. Third, we will address the regime's proliferation of missiles and weapons that threaten its neighbors' global trade and freedom of navigation. And finally, we will deny the regime all paths to a nuclear weapon.
The president added that in the event a solution is unable to be reached by working with Congress and our allies, the agreement can be canceled by him at any time. Reporting in New York, Trinity Chavez, RT.
Change the face of modern war. Colonel McGregor, thanks for coming on.
Sure.
What does this mean and where is it going from here?
Look, this is a very curious case. I haven't figured out how we benefit from decertifying the Iranian agreement and then potentially sliding into a conflict with Iran. Because if we decertify Iran, the Senate will probably pass sanctions. Sanctions will be treated as an act of war by Iran. The Iranians will then say, we have no further incentive to cooperate. They will double down on building nuclear warheads. They will probably get assistance this time from the Russians. We will inevitably collide with them militarily somewhere in the Gulf, in the Indian Ocean, or on the ground, where we have very light, vulnerable forces right now in Iraq. And Iraq is effectively an Iranian ally. It's a Shiite Arab state.
Right.
So you put all of this together and you have to ask yourself, what are we doing? How does this make sense? How do we benefit from this? Because we don't want a wider war. And clearly candidate Trump made it very clear that he did not want to widen any wars. He wanted to gradually disengage.
So what would be the point of this then? How did this happen?
I don't understand it. It doesn't make any sense strategically. The timing is terrible. Our forces are spread very thinly around the globe. We have very light forces on the ground, entirely dependent upon air power for survival. If they are taken under direct assault by the Iranians, supported by the Russians, they're in a lot of trouble, and we would have a great deal of difficulty getting them out of there alive. We could easily be embarrassed, is the bottom line. It would take us a very long time to assemble any troops to go in there. And the notion that somehow or another with bombing or missiles we are going to subjugate Iran or bring it around is simple nonsense, because they will be backed by Russia. So those strategies have no chance of success. I wish, frankly speaking, that we would back away and rethink this whole thing, because I think the timing is terrible. This is not the time to do anything like this. And frankly, the Iranians are not going to renegotiate this thing. It took a long time to get it. Plus, our allies, our friends, everyone else in the world does not see Iran in the same light as we do in Washington, or as Israel does. They see the Sunni Arabs and the Sunni Turks, the Islamists in Ankara, the Islamists in Saudi Arabia and in the Middle East, as far, far more dangerous and hostile to Christians and Jews in the West than Iran.
Yeah, well, look at the body count. It proves
people need to keep their powder dry. This is just one procedural step. He said he believes in a two-step process. He's handing it over to Congress now to debate it and look at it and examine and make recommendations. When you think about it, the agreement was approved previously by a sort of a default process. Congress didn't override the agreement, but it went into effect basically on the executive branch's say-so. So I think now you can expect a thorough debate. And then you've got the issue of managing relationships with Europe and others, and seeing if there may be parts of that agreement that Iran might be willing to renegotiate. Up to now, of course, they've been saying absolutely no, they won't, because they didn't want the president to take the step that he took. Yeah. But now that he's put it, he's put the subject on the table, they're going to have to think hard about what their interests are. And also, I do think the president's got a point about their behavior in some of these other places, like Yemen, Iraq, Syria, and so forth, which have been very problematic, not only for us, but for the other countries in the region.
Now, of course, Iran is also involved in North Korea, we are told, and North Korea has threatened to up its sort of military might and respond maybe soon with more tests and the like. Is this move he had with Iran to deal with this a signal you think he is sending to North Korea as well?
Well, I mean, certainly in terms of the firmness of his policy and his determination to deal with non-proliferation issues, we ought to also remember that that Syrian reactor that was knocked out by Israel back in 2006 that was being built in Syria was being built by North Korean workers, and I'm sure that their access to Syria was facilitated by Iran. So there has been in the past, and there may well continue to be, a nexus between Iran and North Korea.
Now, so far, the president has not talked about any additional sanctions or reimpose sanctions, sir. I mean, is that his way of saying, I'm not going to jump the gun and do crazy stuff here, but I could? How do you interpret that?
You know, I didn't hear the last part. Somebody was interrupting. Pardon me.
I apologize.
No.
He is so far held off on additional sanctions or reimposing sanctions. What do you think the strategy is there?
I think he's waiting for Congress to act. But he said if Congress can't act, then he's going to, take those steps himself. Now, I think he is advocating more sanctions as soon as possible against the Iran Revolutionary Guard Corps and anything that has to do with Iran's sponsorship of terrorism. I think there he'd like to take quick and immediate action. But as far as the action on the nuclear agreement is concerned, I think he's waiting for the reaction of Congress.
So real quickly, I know you're not a market guy. You follow far weightier international issues. But the markets are still up and in record territory, Ambassador. So if they're worried about this leading to some big international crisis, they have a funny way of showing it. Do you think that they're just being naive, or could this develop into something? What?
I mean, if you look at the geopolitical risks around the world, I'm not sure I would rate the situation vis-a-vis Iran, between Iran and the United States, as very high up there at this particular point in time. It's definitely a problem. It's a longer-standing one, but I would put the Korean Peninsula higher on that scale. And as you've noticed, even there, the markets have seemed so far to take that situation in their stride. But if there were ever any kind of more hostile activity to take place, then I should expect you would see the markets price in that risk pretty quickly.
The Iranians, he wanted to do anything to make the Iran deal possible. He was too worried about his legacy. President Obama wanted to become the president who didn't use force and got the deals done. Well, sir, you cannot make deals with dictators. You should punish dictators. You should hold them accountable. He made a deal with the Iran dictatorship. He made a deal with Assad. He made a deal with the Russians. He made deals with all dictators, with Cuba, with a lot of dictators. This should raise a lot of questions.
He is a Syrian chemical weapons attack victim and a refugee. Qassem Eid joins us now from Germany. Good to see you, Qassem.
Thank you so much for having me.
How far did President Obama go to make the Iran deal happen?
I come from a country that was directly affected by Iran terrorist acts. I come from Syria, where the Iranians helped Bashar al-Assad to crush and kill more than 500,000 people to help a dictator who gassed thousands of innocent civilians with chemical weapons, including myself as a chemical weapons survivor. Iran did a lot of terrorist acts in Syria and Iraq and Lebanon and Yemen and many other countries. And when I left, I was forced to leave Syria in 2014, and I came to the United States. All what I did for practically 2 years was just to talk to the U.S. government and anybody who wants to listen and tell them how bad the situation is. But I never got into any kind of help, because in every time I had the chance to get some answers out of a U.S. official, rather in the State Department or Congress or other places, the only answer I used to hear was that the president doesn't want to upset the Iranians. He let Bashar al-Assad and the Iranians slaughter hundreds of thousands of people just so President Obama can come out and say, look, I made a deal, I didn't use force, Iran is not going to make a nuclear bomb. But this is false. The Iranians can make a nuclear bomb within a couple of years, because this the Iran deal that President Obama did was so bad. And all what Obama wanted was just to score political points and come out as the president who made a deal without using force. But that deal cost hundreds of thousands of civilians in Syria their lives. And I just want to make something very clear, that what President Trump right now is doing is the only smart move to counter the Iranians' terrorist acts in the region, and the only thing that he can do to stop another North Korean scenario from happening. I watched Iranian troops in Syria, how they were killing civilians. I watched Iranians helping Bashar al-Assad to slaughter and murder hundreds of thousands of people inside Syria. And what Obama did was just giving them a green light after that nuclear deal. We watched in Syria how the Iranians doubled or maybe tripled their military assistance to Assad because they got the funds and the money to do so. So I really want people to understand that what President Trump did today was amazing and was a very important step forward to just get peace to the Middle East, because as long as Iran can do and kill wherever they want without any accountability, things will only get worse. We will see more refugees, and we will see a lot more civilians getting killed.
Taxes, whether it be health care, now the Iran deal, the Paris Accord. I mean, he's just wiping out everything Obama had measurable success on. As far as the Iran deal is concerned, this is as much a political move as it is anything else. We're going to get out of this thing, but he's not going to be the only one shouldering the responsibility. He is kicking it back to Congress, and he's going to call out the hawks. Okay, now you do your work. Make it better. What do you want? What do the American people want? I also think that somebody in the White House probably talked some sense into the president that, no, don't get out of this totally. You've got to give yourself an avenue to engage. And that's exactly what they did. So this is as much a Tillerson influence and a Mattis influence as anything else.
And let's switch gears here to taxes. We were talking about a 20% corporate tax rate. What would this do to the economy?
You know, Manila, I don't think the mainstream media understands what a 20% tax rate would mean for corporations in this country. It would be a big boon for the corporations. No other Republican president's been able to do it. And if Trump can get this accomplished, if he can get this in the tax package, this will be the big apple that he will swing when he goes for re-election. Yeah. And I think that the corporate community and the business community, he's going to win a lot of friends. I mean, he's going to be able to campaign on that. I'm the only guy that was able to get you down to 20%. I mean, I could just hear him on the campaign trail now. So I think it's being underplayed. This is the big pie in the sky that he wants to accomplish. And if he does, it's going to be awfully hard for the Democrats to beat him in re-election. I think it's that big an issue.
How do you think that might hurt, like, the little guy, the little businessman, though?
Well, I think that there'll be some other things in the tax plan that they pass, if they can get it passed, that will help the middle class, that will help small businesses when it comes to their investment and what they do with their capital. The thing that has not been explained is how is he going to get these companies to repatriate this money to bring the money back home? You can have a tax policy, but that doesn't guarantee that a company is going to take their profits and put them in a certain place and make sure they bring it back to America. So that's a big theory that has never been proven in the past to be successful.
Yeah, and as we know, he's renegotiating NAFTA, so I think that might play a big role going forward in the future
He's getting more pressure on NAFTA than he thought he was going to get. The steelworkers are furious at Trump. He's standing idle right now, counting on this tax plan to go through, and then he wants to do something on the importing of steel, and that plays into NAFTA. The Canadians are a major customer. They're the #1 customer in 35 states in this country, so you're going to have to be delegate there. And we're going to need them if they do something against North Korea. Obviously, the issue with NAFTA is going to be the border, which plays into it, border security, and also the cheap labor that is down in Mexico. And so I don't know how he's going to negotiate that, but the activism is going to be pretty strong here in the next 6 months.
And of course, this morning we woke up to find that the president decided to cut subsidies to Obamacare. Talk about how that's going to affect
This is a big political play here. And the president basically is telling the Congress, especially the Democrats, if you don't come to me and negotiate, it's only going to get worse. And so this is a big negotiation. I mean, where you start out is not where you're going to end up.
Yeah.
So if the Democrats, and I think Nancy Pelosi is yesteryear thinking on this, if she thinks that she can just stonewall and not do anything with this White House, she's only going to hurt her constituents, because Trump has proven that he will move on this. And when he moves on this, it's hurting people. So this is the perfect time for the Democratic leadership to stand with Bernie Sanders and get together collectively and push for universal health care. Get a real separation between the Republicans and the Democrats on health care. This is the perfect time to do that. Get on board on universal health care, make a big statement about it, show that the president is wrong, and then go negotiate with him as best they possibly can. Because Trump's not worried about hurting these people because they don't vote Republican. And a lot of them don't vote, and the Republicans have got a great model for suppressing the vote. So this
just refer to the Iran case, Lou. What happened today, I think, is just a major inflection point in the history of U.S. policy toward Iran. In over 4 decades, no American president prior to Donald Trump has ever had a comprehensive strategy to push back against Iranian aggression and Iranian attacks against American interests. Donald Trump has now, in essence, declared war on the Islamic Republic's Revolutionary Guard Corps.
And we are hearing from our allies, particularly in Europe, intimations that they fear that there will be greater activity, terrorism on the part of the elite Republican Guard of Iran. Meanwhile, that's precisely what they do day in and day out. The largest state sponsor of terrorism, its principal arm, is the Revolutionary Guard.
That's exactly right, Lou. The Revolutionary Guard is the tip of the spear for all of Iran's malignant behavior throughout the Middle East, not only the nuclear program, the human rights abuses, the terrorism, the regional aggression, the ballistic missile program, are all controlled by the IRGC. This is no longer a clerical regime in Iran. This is an IRGC regime, and the president has put a target on the IRGC for the first time in nearly 4 decades of American policy toward Iran.
And remarkably, to credit the president further, he has taken this action without the support of the leadership of the Republican Party in either the Senate or the House. He is operating against the wishes of many of our allies who are utterly dependent on the United States for their ultimate national security and protection. And it's an extraordinary moment, as you say, because he is showing true presidential leadership, and he is standing tall, and unfortunately, for the most part, alone in the decisions he's making.
I think there's some truth to that, Lou, but I think this guy is a pretty masterful negotiator. What he has said to these Europeans, to Congress, to the Iranians, is that, look, if you're so in love with this nuclear deal, I'm prepared to stay with it, but only if you work with me to actually improve it and fix these fatal flaws that exist in this regime.
Right.
That is the...
is not in the vital national security interest of the United States because it effectively is a bad deal, and he's refusing to certify a specific condition of the legislation, which essentially means there was too much given for too little received. And now he's saying to Congress, I'd like you to work on a bipartisan basis to try and fix the deal, and I'm going to instruct my diplomats to talk to the Europeans who've already indicated their willingness to find ways to supplement or complement this deal in order to strengthen it. And then he has said, if you can't get your act together, I'm going to walk away from this deal.
Right.
So I think
what do you think of the deal?
Well, I think it's a deeply flawed deal because I think that the key restrictions on Iran's nuclear program go away over time, regardless of Iranian behavior. So even if Iran complies with the deal and there are no violations, they end up actually with patient pathways to nuclear weapons and intercontinental ballistic missiles, a $1 trillion economy immunized against sanctions, and regional hegemony. It's a bad deal.
Which is what the president has said. Bob Hormats, we have seen alarming behavior on behalf of Iran, all kinds of parades with missiles and, missiles with Hebrew written directly on it saying, we will wipe Israel off the face of the earth and out of the history books. And yet you feel this is a deal that should be upheld. Why?
Well, there are two sets of issues here. One is Iranian behavior in many areas of the world is really shocking and very bad for America's interests. Support for Hezbollah is one example, but there are numerous others. I don't condone those, I condemn those. The question is, would we be better off if there had been no deal at all? And the question is, Iran was moving ahead to build the capability of producing nuclear weapons. This has put dampers on them. It's slowed them down. It's imposed a lot more international scrutiny of what Iran has done and is doing. It's forced them to get rid of a lot of enriched uranium and get rid of certain reactors. So this is something that may have its flaws, but Iran under a deal is much more constrained and much more transparent than it would have been without the deal.
Mark, to businesses, people who are watching this network own some of the businesses that have already, in the wake of the original Iran deal being struck, started to strike deals. I believe General Electric has a multi-billion-dollar deal with the oil and power generation. Boeing has a really big deal with giving commercial aircraft, trading commercial aircraft to the Iranians, or selling it at least. And yet we've seen in the past where they turn commercial airlines and planes into terrorist, they carry terrorists and weapons and things like that. How do you stand on whether businesses right now should be able to invest here in America in Iran?
Well, you brought up Boeing. I mean, Boeing's got a multi-billion-dollar deal, as does Airbus, with an airline called Iran Air, actually, which the United States, the Obama administration, designated in 2011 for shipping weapons and terrorists to support the genocide in Syria. And so that airline is continuing the malign activities for which it was originally sanctioned. So if I had Boeing stock, I guess I'd be asking Boeing CEO and Boeing boards of director why you guys are doing business with an airline that is shipping weapons and fighters. My view on business with Iran is you better be very careful, because if you're doing business with the Revolutionary Guards, they just got designated in their entirety as a terrorist organization. And if you're doing business with these key strategic sectors of Iran's economy, the Revolutionary Guards control those sectors. So you better be really careful. There are huge reputational and legal consequences.
And yet, Bob, this kind of argument goes back to the beginning of time. I mean, 2,000 years ago in the Peloponnesian War, Thucydides had written, if every one of us does not get exactly everything that he or she wanted, let us come at least to terms for as long a period as possible, put off our private quarrels for as long as possible. And yet it is extremely frightening that they support terrorism. And shouldn't that be enough?
Well, it is certainly a big problem, but I remind you that the ability of American airline or American producers to sell to Iranian airline companies, Iran Air in particular, was designated in the agreement as a legitimate transaction by the United States and by the other parties in the agreement. And that has given them the opportunity